So we're now recording. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this evening. And thank you especially to Murrey Stewart, who's joining us to talk about his book, The Camino Ignaciano, From the Basque Country to Catalonia. Murrey, we're really delighted that you're able to join us today and to share your knowledge and experience about this route with us. So the format for this evening is going to be a 30-minute talk, or possibly slightly over 30 minutes. And then we'll open up to the floor for a Q&A session. So for that part of the evening, if you have questions, you can write them in the chat box and me or Kimberly will read them out and Murray will answer. Or there's a raise hand button which you can click and we will then come to you and ask you to ask your question. So well, Murray, if I can hand over to you. Thank you once again for joining us, and it's all yours.
Likewise, thank you everyone who's joined, and thanks very much to Rachel and Camino Pilgrim or CSJ for hosting this event. So hopefully you're all aware that this is not a route that's heading towards Santiago de Compostela. I've done some of those routes, but this route is following in the opposite direction. So the Camino Ignaciano starts in the Basque Country and basically heads to Catalonia, and we're going to have a look at why the walk exists. And I wrote a book about this route during the pandemic, and you'll also see from the screen there that I've written a guidebook to the Basque Country and Navarre, which are two of the autonomous communities through which the Camino Ignaciano passes. So I've put this quote up on the screen. Hopefully it's not too pretentious, but many of you, I'm sure, have walked on the Camino de Santiago or done other long distance walking. And one of the major attractions for me of long distance walking is simply that it gets you so much closer to the landscapes, to the people, to the cultures, to the food and wine, than whizzing past in a car or speeding on a train. So this saying, I think, really encapsulates why I enjoy long distance walking. Now, I've put up as my next slide the Caminos de Santiago that crisscross the Iberian Peninsula. I'm not saying all of them are on here. Some of you eagle-eyed may be able to spot one that's not, I don't know. But the reason that I've put this up is that obviously the Santiago routes, I think if we go back to the 1980s, the route had almost died out in terms of pilgrim numbers that were heading to Santiago de Compostela. I think from memory, at one point in the 1980s, there were less than 1,000 people claiming their Compostela in Santiago. And if we look at where these routes have come from since then, I think the last figures for a whole year are somewhere around 350,000 people completing the route. Possibly, I think that was maybe last year. And this year, I think the indications are that, it's going to be even more, maybe up to 400,000. Half of those, of course, go on the Camino Frances, but everyone does their own Camino. And on the Santiago routes, the last time I did a full route, I have to say I found it a little bit crowded. And that's really why I started to look for other pilgrimage routes that might give me something akin to what I experienced the first time I did one of the Camino de Santiago. So why has the Santiago routes become so amazingly popular? Well, I mean, I suppose it could be because everyone's become more religious. However, I'm not really sure that's the answer. Some of you may disagree, but the Santiago routes have had an awful lot of publicity, or a great lot of publicity, in the last few years. There's been books by Germans and books by Koreans, which have kind of propelled people from those countries to go and do the walk. And then I think for the English-speaking populations of the world, and in particularly North America, this film, The Way, which many of you will have seen, has I think, really been a catalyst to increase the numbers of people heading to Santiago de Compostela. I'm now putting up a slide that shows us what the Camino Ignaciano does. So if you look in the top left of this slide, you'll see Loyola, which is where the route begins in the Basque Country, which is known as Euskadi in the Basque language. You can see, therefore, the route then goes directly south and enters into La Rioja, and then turns almost abruptly eastwards, going through La Rioja, the southern part of Navarra, into Aragon, which it cuts through the middle of, and then enters into Catalonia. And you'll see on the right-hand side there that when it gets to Montserrat, it turns abruptly northwards and finishes in the Catalonian city of Manresa. So this route in total is about 675 kilometers, or nearly 400 miles. If you walk in this route, there's 27 official stages. A couple of those stages are pretty long, certainly too long for me to do in a oneer. Some of you may be fitter than me. So when I say long, they're kind of pushing 40 kilometers. And when I did the walk, I split them. And in my book, I advise people that might want to consider splitting those routes into two. So you're really, to do the whole route, you're looking at around about a month of walking at my pace anyway. When I say the official stages, this route is very popular with Jesuits, and I'll go on to why that might be in a minute. And the Jesuits do a lot to maintain the route. I spoke to one of the Jesuit fathers who actually spends his summer holidays going out doing the waymarking with his pot of orange paint. And you'll notice I don't have a particular liking of garish orange, but you'll see the background to all these slides is orange, which is actually the official colour, if you like, of the Ignatian route, as opposed to the yellow waymarking that you'll get on the Santiago routes. You're looking for orange arrows when you're doing the Camino Ignaciano. Now the route starts, as I said, in the Basque Country. I don't know if any of you know the Basque Country. I'm doing a little bit of shameless but very brief self-promoting of my guidebook to the Basque Country. Most people who've been to the Basque Country will know it probably because of one of two things. This is the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, and the other kind of show-stopping attraction are the beaches of San Sebastian, which is a fantastic city. And I'd thoroughly recommend, San Sebastian is one of the access points for getting to the start of the Camino Ignaciano. It's a quite simple bus journey from San Sebastian to Loyola. If you do have the time to spend a couple of days in San Sebastian, I think it's a wonderful city. The Basque Country then has those two major tourist attractions, but it has loads more. It has its own language, which is of great interest really to linguists, because it doesn't really relate to any other language, and you certainly can't translate anything from Basque into Spanish or French just by looking at it. The Basque Country also has fantastic food. Even some Spaniards from elsewhere will admit it's rather grudgingly perhaps that it's the best food in Spain. And it has lots of little quirky things like its own sport. So this always looks a little bit to me like an episode of The World's Strongest Man. But if you go to a Basque festival in the summer, you'll find people chopping logs competitively. You'll find them pulling ox carts, and you'll find them lifting very, very, very heavy stones like this guy here. Good luck to them. So Basque Country is definitely somewhere to maybe spend a day or two at the beginning of the walk. A couple of things that are be familiar to any of you who've done the Santiago routes will be this. This is the pilgrim passport, which the Camino Ignaciano has basically shamelessly copied it. but you get your stamps along the way as you would do on the Santiago routes. And if you complete the route, then you can get, at the end, you can get your, well, this is the equivalent of the Compostela. Obviously, it's the, the Ignatian version. I chose to get mine in the Catalan language. I can't really quite remember why, but it is available in English. And one similar thing to the Santiago routes is it's got the same rule about doing the last 100 kilometers on foot. So if you do the last kilometers, in a oneer, then you can get yourself your Ignatian equivalent of the Compostela. So we're going to talk a little bit about Ignatius. Why does this walk exist? Well, the Ignaciano is named after Ignatius. Ignatius was born in 1491, and he was born in this Casa Torre, which is a tower house. He was born into a fairly noble family, and at that time in this region, in the Basque Country, if you were rich, you would live somewhere like this. And the reason you would live somewhere like this is because if you didn't have these thick walls and small windows, then at some point your neighbors would probably come and slaughter you. It was a time of the War of the Bands, they called it. It was basically gang warfare. So if you could afford it, you'd lock yourself away in somewhere like this for your own protection. And this is exactly the house, obviously restored, where Ignatius of Loyola was born. So say he was born in 1491 into a noble family, and he chose a military career. So he decided he was going to be a soldier, and from all accounts, he had a reputation as being a bit of a Jack the Lad. So as well as being a soldier, he was a little bit of a playboy and a party animal. Nowadays, the tower house that you've just seen is actually enclosed within the walls of this sanctuary, which was built a few hundred years later in his honor. So the tower house that we've seen has a museum in it. I must admit, I've not seen it since it was recently refurbished. But before that, it was definitely worth visiting, and gave you all the background in more detail than I can in this talk, all about Ignatius and his life and his works and the walk. So the sanctuary was also, as I say, surrounds it. It's definitely worth a visit. So if you can spend a day in Loyola before you start walking, I would strongly advise it. Now, Ignatius, as I say, had a military career, but in 1521, as he was trying to defend the city of Pamplona from the French, he took an injury, a ricochet cannonball injured his knee. And this sculpture, which is now outside the tower house, shows him being brought back to the tower house from Pamplona for a period of recovery. And while he was there, he was obviously bedridden, and his attendants, as I say, it was a rich family, so they had attendants. They rather sneakily fed him on a diet of books about the great works of the saints, the deeds of the saints. So poor Ignatius was sitting in his bed, trying to get better, probably wishing he could read some kind of boys' own adventure stories, but instead he was having to read these deeds of the saints. And it got him thinking, and he started to think that maybe he'd give up his soldiering and give up his philandering and try to spend the rest of his life emulating the great deeds of the saints. And that's what he decided to do. He started to have a religious conversion. And in 1521, he set off from the tower house. He still had a limp from his injuries, but he set off from his tower house with the objective of getting to Jerusalem. So he set off with a mule, and the Basque Country, even in its interior, has always had a very industrial kind of economic driver. So it's a very, very wealthy part of Spain. though Basques probably would argue it's not Spain, it's the Basque Country, so you've got to be careful what you say. But once you set off from Loyola, you set off on a disused railway track, nice gentle opening to your walk, and then you could enter a town called Zumarraga at the end of stage 1, which is quite industrial. But from day 2, you then get out into the Basque countryside, which is quite beautiful. This is a reservoir that you pass on day 2 of your walk. The first 6 stages of the Camino Ignaciano are by far the most beautiful and also by far the most challenging. So this also is on stage 2, and you're going to do quite a lot of climbing. The height of this mountain pass at the top here is around 1,200 meters. So, you know, you're getting up almost to Ben Nevis height, which should tell you that it's not a part of the walk to be doing in winter. When I did it, I actually started further down in October. I started on stage 6. I went to Manresa, and then I came back the following spring and did the first 6 stages. And even in the summer, these mountains have a reputation for thunderstorms, which usually happen in the late afternoon. So you do have to keep an eye on the weather forecast. At the end of stage 2, you reach this place, which is called Arantzazu, another sanctuary, church, quite ugly, I would say. It's not your average looking church, but it does have great historical and artistic significance to the Basques. So if you go inside here, you'll find there's works of art and sculptures done by some of the big names of Basque art. And on the outside here, you can see that there's the apostles. These are the figures of the apostles in the middle, and there's actually 14 of them. And that in itself, of course, is a controversy, because although I'm not religious, I do know that there weren't 14 apostles. So that's a mystery which I'll let you perhaps do a little bit of research on, or maybe buy my book and find out the answer. So after Arantzazu, you continue upwards and you continue through the Basque Mountains. This is actually the Valle de Urbia. I'm pleased to say you don't actually have to climb the mountains at the back here. You skirt round the front of them. But as I say, it is really beautiful. And definitely, if you want to do only 1 week of the Camino Ignaciano, I would recommend the first week. And before your mountain stages finish, you also have to cross a second range of mountains. This is the eastern end of the Sierra Cantabria, which obviously stretches all the way westwards over to Cantabria. And again, you don't have to go up this horrendous looking rock in front of you, but you are going to have a climb of maybe 900 meters to get over this. And at the end of your mountain stages, the Camino Ignaciano is going to deposit you in this little village called Laguardia, which translates as the Sentinel. So it's a little village that's raised up, looking down over the plains towards Navarra, and also over the Basque Country and back to the Sierra Cantabria that you've just crossed. This is officially designated as one of Spain's most beautiful towns, and I think it definitely deserves that accolade. So it's got these narrow medieval streets. Beneath a lot of these houses are wine cellars. You're deep in wine country. You're not actually in La Rioja, but you're in Rioja Alavesa, which is the southern part of the Basque Country, and is a great place to visit. This little town has numerous attractions. As I say, it's got the wine cellars. It's got a performing clock. It's got a church that's well worth visiting. It's got lovely restaurants and hotels. And on the outside of the town, you'll find not dingy wine cellars, but some of these kind of architectural works of wineries. So top left, the one is Bodegas Isios, and on the right is the Marqués de Riscal Hotel, just to the south of LaGuardia. It looks a little bit like the Guggenheim Museum's coming on its summer holidays. This is actually a hotel, but there's a winery next to it. So that's Laguardia. And on the next stage, you look back over the mountains as the sun rises, and you know that your hard work in terms of mountain climbing or hill climbing is over. So I suppose the warning there is you've got to be fairly fit when you start this walk, because there's not any easy stages to kind of break yourself in. But you look back over the Sierra Cantabria and you proceed south. I should just say at this point that I cheated slightly on my walk, because I had the assistance of 2 donkeys and the donkey handler that you see on the left there. This is Gaspar and Rocky, the 2 donkeys who they weren't stupid enough to carry me because I'm far too heavy, but they did carry my luggage, and that was a great help. And within my book, you can find the details. If you want to hire a couple of donkeys or 1 donkey, then I would strongly recommend it. It gives a different dimension to doing a walk, because basically the donkey dictates what pace you go at, and it's donkey pace, and there is only 1 pace. So here we see Rocky. He's just looking on at the sheep as they go through the Basque Country. Area is waiting for his lunch. And this was the donkey hotel at the end of stage 5. So the donkeys stayed here. I didn't stay here. I stayed somewhere slightly more luxurious, but it's recommended. It may sound a bit corny, but I had a fantastic time with these donkeys. I really did. Anyway, so we've left Laguardia. At this point, I said goodbye to the donkeys, and you then cross the River Ebro and enter into La Rioja itself. So this is Spain's smallest mainland autonomous community of the 17 autonomous communities in Spain. It is very small, but obviously because of its wine, it kind of punches above its weight, and its economy is basically wine, wine, and more wine. I'm just going to go back to the map here, and you'll see on the left there where the Camino Ignaciano turns at around Navarrete and starts heading east. That's where we've reached at the moment. For some reason, this map shows La Rioja has been absolutely massive. Someone's forgotten to throw in the western boundary of it. I can assure you it is very, very small. So we're now turning eastwards, and we're continuing from Navarrete and reaching Logroño, which is a city that may be familiar to some of you if you've been on the Camino Frances, because between Navarrete and Logroño, so the stage to get to Logroño, you're actually walking on the Camino Frances, but you're walking in the opposite direction. So don't be surprised if you do this walk when people stop you and tell you you're going the wrong way, and you have to politely point out to them that the orange arrows are the ones that you're following, even though they're following the yellow ones. But Logroño, for anyone who's been there, I think it's got one of the best bar streets, tapas streets in Spain. I mean, I haven't been to all of them in Spain, but this little Calle del Laurel, or Laurel Street, and its cross street are absolutely jam-packed, as you can see, with tapas bars. And if you're going to take a day off, you're walking, then this is possibly somewhere to do it, just to give you a bit of time to recover the next day. So heading eastwards again, still in La Rioja, you come to the town of Alfaro, which has the largest urban stork colony of anywhere in the world, so I'm told. And the storks love building their huge nests on top of the church. And while you might think this is of a nuisance to the locals, they actually love the presence of the storks. The storks feed mainly on freshwater crayfish, which they pluck from the irrigation channels of the fields around about. And the reason the locals love it is because the crayfish actually do quite a lot of damage to the banks of the irrigation channels. And so when the storks arrive and start eating them, The locals love it. And of course, in true Spanish fashion, they hold a stork festival just to say thank you, or just so they can enjoy themselves. So let's just go back briefly again to the same map. You can see Alfaro there, just to the left of center. That's where we've reached, and we're now going to cross the very southern part of Navarra. Navarra, you might remember from the title of the other book, my guidebook. I cover in that guidebook. It's a fantastic region. It doesn't have any coast, so it maybe doesn't get as many visitors as it deserves. Unfortunately, Camino Ignaciano only really cuts through the very southern tip of Navarra. But in the north, with the border with France, obviously you've got the Pyrenees, very spectacular scenery. Just about where the top of the first R of Navarra is on that map, you've got the city of Pamplona, which of course is the Hemingway kind of city, where they have the Bull Festival, San Fermin. And then below, to the south of Pamplona, there are some areas of semi-desert, which are kind of a little bit like Arizona and well worth visiting. But we'll skip over Navarra because the Camino Ignaciano does not dwell there for long, just about a stage and a half. And you enter into Aragon. And from Logroño to beyond Zaragoza, which we'll come to in a minute, you're following the River Ebro, which I think you follow for over 200 kilometers, and is obviously very useful in that it helps you not get lost. I've got to say that the waymarking is pretty good on the Camino Ignaciano. The orange arrows are there. It's not got the same infrastructure really as the Camino de Santiago. I think the Camino Ignaciano is probably somewhere near to where the Santiago routes were in the 1980s. So at this stage, there's probably still only about 1,000 people walking this route every year. Now, this is the River Ebro. You can see that the storks continue to build their nests, not just on the churches of Alfaro, but also anywhere they can find a space. This looks like a kind of 3-story nest building or whatever. Now, I said to you, I told you a little bit about Ignatius, but I should probably, before I forget, tell you a little bit more. So he was on his way to Jerusalem. He was still kind of wrestling with himself as to whether he should undergo this full religious conversion. The reason we talk about Ignatius is he didn't actually get to Jerusalem on this walk. As we saw, he ends up in Manresa. But in later life, he would get to Jerusalem, and then he went to Paris to study. And when he was studying in Paris, with a few other like-minded people, he founded the Society of Jesus, which we know as the Jesuits. And the Jesuits became one of the most influential Catholic religious orders. I'm not religious in any way, but this route follows the exact route, more or less, I should say, of Ignatius. And the reason we know that is Ignatius did write kind of a diary for his walk. So I suppose that's one way in which it differs from the Santiago routes. Obviously, you know, we know why we go to Santiago with St. James and his remains, but this is actually following in the footsteps of Ignatius. If you remember from the map, we've now entered into Aragon, and Aragon is pretty sparsely populated, but it does contain Spain's 5th biggest city, Zaragoza. And what I really like about the Camino Ignaciano is that it brings you along the banks of the River Ebro, and it takes you straight to this basilica, El Pilar, which is Zaragoza's biggest tourist attraction. And when you leave Zaragoza on the Camino Ignaciano, you also go out through along the banks of the Ebro, which there's no big ugly industrial estates to cross. You come in by the river, all your hotels and restaurants and El Pilar Basilica are all there. and then you exit along the banks of the river. So it's quite a nice experience, even though it's in the middle of the city. Zaragoza is perhaps not somewhere we consider visiting on a city break, and I think it'd be exaggerating to say that it could compete with Madrid or Barcelona or Seville, but it's a nice place to take a rest day. If that's what you fancy. There's certainly enough attractions to keep you busy for a day if you're having the rest from walking. 2 days later, you're still in Aragon, but you're in somewhere that's definitely not a city landscape. This is called Los Monegros, or Black Mountains, but you're not going to see towering mountains. What you're going to see is this desert, and you're not going to see many people here. So this is somewhere that you wouldn't really want to be crossing in the middle of August. It can be very, very hot. There's no infrastructure, and you're probably going to have 2 or 3 hours of this kind of landscape. Rather perplexingly, back in, I think, the 1980s, someone decided this would be a fantastic place to build Europe's answer to Las Vegas. And a plan was drawn up, multi-billion-pound plan, involved building loads and loads of casinos, 5-star hotels, and all the kind of things that you would get in Las Vegas. But fortunately, I would say it never happened. It was just someone's dream. I don't really think the investors had the money. So what you're left with is this fairly, well, almost completely unspoilt desert landscape. So back to the map, if you can see Zaragoza right in the middle there, we're now slightly to the right, to the east of Zaragoza. And we're going to enter into the 5th of the autonomous communities that the Camino Ignaciano passes through, and that's Catalonia. So the Camino Ignaciano starts in the Basque Country, which is really one of the Iberian Peninsula's strongest regional identities, and it finishes in Catalonia, which is the other strongest regional identity. And as soon as you enter into Catalonia, you'll start seeing the Catalan flags hanging from the windows. You'll see the liberty signs, and obviously you've got a different language now. This is the little town of Cervera. And so on your second last day, this is what confronts you. This is Montserrat Mountains. Montserrat means serrated mountain, and you can see from its profile exactly why it's got that name. Again, if your knees are trembling, you don't have to cross these mountains. You kind of skirt along the edge, and on your last night before you complete your walk, you end up at this monastery, the Montserrat Monastery. One of Spain's biggest tourist attractions. This attracts about 2.1 million visitors every year. And it would be a fitting place to finish your walk, except you've still got one more stage to go. But here you'll find a museum of fine art. You'll find the Black Madonna. You'll also, if you're lucky, be able to hear the choir. It's got a very famous choir. Sometimes, unfortunately, they're called away to perform overseas. This is where Ignatius, on his walk, actually surrendered his weapons. So he kind of, it's quite important in his religious conversion that it took him all the way to the second, what proved to be the second last stage, if you like, before he decided he would lay down his weapons. And that was kind of him saying, right, I'm definitely giving up this soldiering lark, and I'm going to do something more worthwhile with my life. So as I say, this is where you spend your second last night. And then you have 25 kilometers of downhill. You look behind you to see the Montserrat profile again, the jagged mountains, the sawtooth mountains. And you arrive in your destination city, which is Manresa. Now, why does it finish in Manresa, you might be asking? The guy was on his way to Jerusalem. And to get to Jerusalem, he obviously had to get to the coast. So his first intended destination was Barcelona, where he was planning to get a ship and sail across the Med and get to Jerusalem. But what happened, and this I found this quite ironic because I researched this book and did most of the walk during the pandemic. But the reason he couldn't get to Barcelona was because Barcelona was actually in lockdown. And it was in lockdown because there was an outbreak of the bubonic plague. So he couldn't get to Barcelona, so he diverted to Manresa. And when you approach Manresa now, so this is the last stage of your walk, you come around the corner, and this is what kind of hits you in the face. This is called La Cova, which translates as the cave. Now you can see it is not a cave. It is a massive complex. But in 1522, when Ignatius arrived, if you can try and imagine away this building, there basically in the hillside, there were a series of caves. And he spent 11 months in Manresa. I don't think it was all because of the lockdown, but he was basically completing his religious conversion. He was spending time with the poor. He was kind of what's the word? He was being slightly masochistic, and he was starving himself, and really not treating himself too well, to the extent where I think some of the local women had to take care of him and make sure he didn't do himself some damage. But he wrote, during these 11 months, he wrote something called the Spiritual Exercises, which has become a kind of prayer guidebook, if you like, for the Jesuits, which he went on, as I say, he was a co-founder of. So over the years, from when Ignatius stayed in his little cave, they built a chapel and a church, and there's a center of kind of Jesuit learning here. And you can see how it's expanded into this massive edifice. As I say, I'm not religious, so it's certainly got interest for me. But for me, the highlight was to go into the church and see these, what I think are absolutely fantastic mosaics, which are done by I always get my Slovenians and Slovakians muddled up, but Marko Rupnik, I think, is a Slovenian. And these are very modern. There's about 550 square meters of these mosaics, which I think are fantastic. Manresa has also got some quite nice modernist architecture. And so it's somewhere that at the end of the walk, you probably want to spend a day just to unwind and appreciate. If the Ignatian thing's kind of grabbed you, there's about 22 places of Ignatian reference points in the city. And if not, it's quite a pleasant place just to relax. But I'd definitely recommend seeing these mosaics. So I've just come back to this to kind of finish off the main part of the talk. We've seen the kind of show-stopping highlights along the way, what I would call the kind of tick box things. The Basque Mountains are fantastic. Laguardia is a lovely little town. You've got the Logroño with its party street. You've got the Storks in Alfaro. You've got Zaragoza. You've got the Monegros desert, and you've got Montserrat. So these are the kind of things that you might visit, even if you weren't doing a walk, if you were driving around in your car. But I think the other thing about this quote is there's so many things you come across, and all of you who've done walk will have memories of things which are quirky or unusual. And I certainly have those from doing the Camino Ignaciano. So the little treasures, as I call them, obviously you're going to see a lot of wildlife, mainly birds. This fellow on the right is a common buzzard who just literally dropped out of a tree in front of me. I think he was probably a baby because he didn't seem to be able to fly very, very far, and got back up in his tree and posed for photographs. Very kind of him or her. What you probably don't expect to see in the middle of Spain is, I think this is an alpaca, but someone might know, it might be a llama, but staying overnight at one of the, what effectively was like a motorway service station, I came across this little mini zoo with the alpaca and wallabies. The city of Lleida in Catalonia is famous for its snails, and it has a snail festival every year where the residents eat something like 3 tons of snails in about 2 days. And even if you're not there when the festival's taking place, you can guarantee you'll find a restaurant with snails on the menu. A little village in Navarra called Cortes has a massive castle which has been restored by local volunteers, and they take great fun in opening this door by remote control to reveal their ghost, which I think probably scares the little school kids who come round, but didn't really frighten me. But fantastic work they've done in restoring the castle as volunteers. In the middle of Catalonia, on your walk, you have to do a double take when you see a collection of jet fighters in this tiny little village. Now, I thought I'd uncovered a plot to overthrow the Spanish government and get Catalan independence, but in fact, this is a private collection of jet fighters. I don't suppose any of you've got a private collection of jet fighters, but yeah, rather unusual sight. This lady was very happy to show me some of the Basque cheeses up in the Valley de Urbia, which we saw earlier. Fantastic cheese. You get the chance to eat it. Idiazabal, it's called. This town of Cervera, which I mentioned, has a massive university building, which has a very interesting history behind it. Again, it's in the book, so I'm not really going to tell you why. It's not a university anymore. It's used partially as a school, but it's just completely disproportionate to the size of the place. And also in this town, you'll find a museum that's dedicated to a chap called Marc Marquez, who is one of the greatest MotoGP champions of all time, which made me wonder why Catalonia produces such a disproportionate number of motorcycle champions. I don't know the answer, and none of the Catalans seem to know either. The Osborne bull might be familiar to some of you. He appears all over Spain, apart from in the Basque Country and Catalonia, because it's deemed to be too Spanish for them to have one. But he comes in very useful in 3 of the stages as a kind of way marker. I think there's one between Logroño and Navarrete, so you might have seen him or her, well, no, him, obviously it's a bull. You might have seen him on that stage if you've done the Camino Frances. So that's it, really. Thank you very much for listening. I've put up my website there. There is obviously my book, there's the website. If any of you are Jesuits or particularly interested in a more formal kind of spiritual journey, I will put my hands up and say there is another guidebook that's produced by the Jesuits, which includes obviously the 27 stages of walking, but also has 27 spiritual stages. I don't cover that in my book. All I will say in favor of my book is it's half the size, and therefore it fits much easier in your backpack than the Jesuits book. But you know, the Jesuits books are very good as well. So thank you very much. I probably missed out some vital piece of information that I'm going to get embarrassed at when someone asks me the first question. But yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Murray. It's wonderful hearing you walk us through the walk and such varied landscapes and things to see. We've got some questions that have come into the chat box already, but just before we go on to them, the book is available on our website to buy. There's a discount code, which is Ignaciano15 for 15% off. And yes, so I'll put that in the chat box now, and it's on our website. So we've got some questions that have come in. The first one is it difficult to walk it backwards from Manresa to Loyola?
Well, what I would say is, in terms of way marking, I mentioned that that between Navarrete and Logroño, you're walking on the Camino Ignaciano, but in the opposite direction from the Santiago pilgrims. I should also have said that along the River Ebro, excuse me, you are actually sharing the route with the Camino del Ebro, which is a Santiago-bound route. Can't actually remember for how long you follow that, but for quite a considerable way. So you will have, if you wanted to walk it backwards on that section, certainly you would have your yellow arrows to follow. And most, if not all, of the Camino Ignaciano is on some kind of GR route. So the way marking is fine. As I said, it's not, the way marking overall is not as good as the Camino de Santiago or the Camino Frances at least. But yeah, it's entirely doable. I personally couldn't get my head around reading a guidebook and following directions backwards, but that's probably just my own personal limitation. But yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't do it.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. The next couple of questions are, where do you get the pilgrim passport, and does it need to be stamped twice in the last, so I guess twice a day in the last 100 kilometers?
Right, yeah, the pilgrim passport is not, basically where you get it at Loyola, and you get it from the reception desk of the Casa Torre. So Ignatius's birthplace, which I say is now a museum, you get it from there. Now I actually got mine in advance. I got it from the tourist office at Loyola. There's a tourist office right opposite the sanctuary. But I think that was possibly because I was writing a book about it, and I happened to know the lady at the tourist office. So you have to get it, really, you have to get it at the Casa Torre, the reception of that museum at Loyola. Yeah. That, okay. I think, probably the only place. I'm sorry. The stamping of the passport. Yes, you should get 2 stamps a day in the last 100. Yeah.
Okay. Somebody has asked if you can drive the Camino Ignaciano?
Right. Not really, no. In my book, I do I think I've got a couple of pages of saying, well, you know, if you want to kind of scope it out by car, or you just don't like walking, I do actually have a little suggested itinerary by car to pick up some of the highlights of the Camino Ignaciano, but you can't do the whole route. If you look at those first stages out of Loyola, you know, you're crossing mountains, and there's not roads through, by and large, there's not roads through those mountains. So you can't really do it by car. You could go and see some of the highlights, just picking them out of the book and following the vehicle itinerary I give there. And likewise with cycling, you could cycle it, but you couldn't cycle the exact route. I mean, some of those mountain stages, I don't even think the toughest mountain cyclist could get up them, to be honest. And I don't cover cycling in my book, so it's only for walkers, really.
Thank you. I think I've just muted you, Murray. I meant to unmute myself. So if you are able to unmute yourself for the next question, sorry about that. So then there are questions about where to stay. So somebody's asked, where can you stay while walking? Are the pilgrim hostels on the way? Can it be done on a budget? Are the hotel accommodations in each city and village as well as hostels? What was your experience with accommodation?
Yes, sorry, I should have mentioned that. So I'm very glad to ask that. Okay, so as I've said, the infrastructure, if you think of the pilgrim numbers I talked about, we're talking about 1,000 people maybe doing it every year, compared with, you know, let's say 200,000 of the Camino Frances. So I think of the 27 stages, there's currently 16 where there is dormitory style accommodation in albergues. In the others, you're going to have to rely on pensions or little hotels. So it's probably going to work out overall, it's going to work out more expensive than doing the equivalent number of stages on the Camino Frances. The infrastructure is, in parts, is quite patchy. So for example, on stage, let's just pick a stage. On stage 4, for example, there is one place to stay that has 8 bedrooms, and there's nowhere else to stay, and you have to eat there, which, you know, some might put some people off. I mean, I actually found it an attraction. I definitely recommend pre-booking, because although the Ignatian pilgrim numbers are low, as I said, a lot of the routes are shared with the GR, you know, the long distance walking routes that have got other names, if you like. And so you might come across a group of walkers who are not on the Camino Ignaciano, but just happen to be walking that route as a, you know, weekend walk. So I'd say definitely pre-book. Obviously, once you get to the cities like Logroño, Zaragoza, Lleida, Manresa, there's plenty of accommodations there. But yeah, 16 out of the 27 stages have pilgrim accommodation, if you like. There was a couple that are closed that I think have now opened, so it might have gone up to 17 or 18. So yeah, it's kind of that level at the moment. Yeah. And there's one stage, sorry, at the end of Los Monegros, there's actually no accommodation whatsoever. But there's a little cheat that involves getting there's one bus that passes a day. Luckily, it passes in late afternoon, and you have to catch it, go into the next village, and then if you want to complete the route honestly and properly, you then have to get the bus back the next morning and walk the stage. Walk the stage. But there's actually, yeah, there's one place with no accommodation. So yeah.
Thank you for that. That's, yeah, it must be really different to walking the kind of more walked Caminos, but that adds to part of the adventure.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I mean, I'd say if the people listening have done the Camino Frances, and the whole buzz of it is obviously being with, you know, well, dozens of other walkers every day. I mean, there's a massive attraction, obviously, in meeting people from other countries and finding out their motivation, all that kind of thing. This is a very different kind of walk. I don't think it will ever become another Camino Santiago, but I do think, and this is maybe a little bit opinionated, but following some of the Facebook on social media, I can see there is an element of Camino Santiago walkers who are maybe getting a little bit frustrated, perhaps, with, you know, the tour buses unloading in Sarria, and you know, so it's different. You know, I did it during the pandemic, so legally I should add, but you know, so I probably got an even more a slightly different impression that you would do if you were doing it in May, June this year. You'd probably meet more people than I did, and most of the people I met were people going to come to Santiago but going in the other direction.
Okay. Somebody has asked which was the stage that didn't have accommodation.
Right, it's the stage that goes from a place called Fuentes de Ebro and crosses the Los Monegros. So I'll just give you the stage number. Yeah, stage 17.
Okay, thank you.
It ends in a place, and use place in inverted commas, called the Venta de Santa Lucia. But Venta, as anyone who's familiar with Spain, is basically a shop, and it's actually a restaurant, a kind of truckers restaurant. But there's nowhere to sleep. I mean, you know, you always get the option of sleeping out under the stars if the weather is good. Wild camping generally is illegal in Spain, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So, and you wouldn't really want to be carrying a tent for 27 stages just to use it on one. But yeah, that's the tricky stage. Yeah, and I nearly missed the one bus because it's the kind of place where, because it's in the middle of nowhere, you know, the bus driver's not really expecting to see anyone, and I had to almost throw myself in front of it to get the driver to stop. So, I mean, you've always got a taxi option, but you know, you don't really want to be spending money on a taxi.
Okay, well, that's all the questions in the chat box. So, well, yes, unless somebody's trying to ask one now. No. Murray, thank you very much for joining us and for sharing all of your expertise and knowledge on the subject. And hopefully, oh, sorry, there's noise in my background, but hopefully lots of us will be able to embark on the Camino Ignaciano in the coming years and use your guidebook to do so. But thank you for your inspiration, and yes, hopefully. And
thanks again to everyone for joining. And yeah, I mean, you know, it's definitely an alternative to the Santiago routes. I know there's lots of Santiago routes, but it's worth considering. And I tried to put in my book little quirky things about the regions I'm going through that you know, might otherwise not occur to people. So try to make it